poem that was not long ago, around early part of this month. Um, it was in national news. It's called The Parade. This isn't about that parade, but this is called The Parade. I saw the old men marching in the parades, veterans of foreign wars in their uniforms and wheelchairs. I remember when the last Civil War veteran died, and the last one to go up the hill with Teddy. I've seen the frail, thin corpse of the core of the greatest generation, marching for as long as they can, and we are so proud of them, for they are proof of our national nature. There will be more parades. There will be many more parades. The last one to fight in World War II will be dying soon. Then it's the last Korean vet, followed by my generation, the Vietnam-era vets. It is a parade that never seems to stop, and there is a line of recent vets waiting for their time. 2 generations of them stacking up to march in honor of fresh new graves in Arlington marching to the horizon. Sometimes I wish we didn't love parades so much and could give all our children a generation or 2 to rest without fearing to be sacrificed to this national lust for parades. This one's called Borrowed Time. We all live on borrowed time, a pile of borrowed atoms, both temporary and immortal, just lent to us for our brief moment of animation. We believe in beginnings and ends without any proofs for either, as if the universe began when we first drew breath and will end when our life does, our borrowed atoms giving up their ghost. We are small, but have big ideas about our importance, short-lived, but able to dream that we can live forever, in our visibly thinning skin, inventing gods to promise us that we're not frail while we truly are. But we are made of eternal dust and bathe in the light of stars that winked out long before time began. Just a pile of borrowed atoms creating insubstantial memories on borrowed time. Real cheerful stuff here.
A philosopher. You're a philosopher.
Good though.
Thank you. This one's called Relationships. I've got an old piece of furniture. It was old when I got it, and I've just been using it. Lately, I've thought about it differently, like I have a relationship with it now, and I am guilty of neglect. It is made of oak, but stained to look like walnut, and the finish is very tired. I feel it is time for an intervention. The poor thing can't be feeling proud, and the last thing I want is to live with knowing that. So I am refurbishing my old piece of furniture. I want it to be what it once was, even if we both know that's impossible. It is the thought that counts, and it is now that I'm thinking about it. Our relationship can't help but improve after this. And we do have a relationship. Drawers full of memories and history like all furniture gets over time. I want it to outlive me, even as it holds my essence, so that it can do the same for the next person it was built to serve. And that's all the poems from this book I'm going to read for you. But I'm going to read some of the memoirs. It's the other, probably 2/3 of the book are memoirs. And this is what I wrote as a preface to that. An old man tells his stories. I've been waiting a long time to do this, my whole life in fact, but here it is. I don't feel like the storybook of my life as it has reached its last page. I'm planning on more memorable events to document if I'm lucky, but here's a good chunk of what I've lived through up to now. It's been an interesting journey. I hope after reading this you'll agree. There's a lot of stories in here about my work experiences. You know, I seemed to be when I was growing up, everybody was looking to, what are you going to be when you grow up? You know, that question. And it was like a dream that you get a good job and you keep doing that good job your whole life until you retire. And that just hasn't happened to me. I've had probably a dozen years here, a dozen years there, a bunch of different jobs that about for that length of time. But then a number of other jobs that were more short-lived, and none of them are the same. They've all been different, So I write about my time in the military here, my time working at the cannery, what it's like to work in the lumber mill, things like that. So what I'm going to do is read you some stories here. This first one they're not very long. It's called Living with Whales. Getting to see whales is a high point in many people's lives, a bucket list item. A whole industry has grown out of it to give people a chance. Off the Oregon coast, anyway, the humpback is a very likely whale species to see. Once international law banned the taking of their species, their numbers have rebounded, which is good news for whale lovers everywhere. People are more acquainted with humpbacks because a lot of albums featuring their songs were sold. And maybe that's one reason for their popularity. I've never been keen on going out whale watching. If I'm going out in the ocean, it's to go fishing, so the whales came to me. I had the good fortune to work on a cabin for the Forest Service up in Alaska on San Fernando Island's southernmost tip, a place called Amargura Point. The tip of the point was on a well-used channel. I saw big timber barges bound for Japan using it, so naturally the whales would be using it too. A lot of them would turn north after passing the point and subsequently swim right by our job site, offshore not a quarter-mile away. Seemed like we saw them every day. One day a pair dawdled together for a couple hours not 100 yards out. The only thing I could figure out, being actually able to see the flipper activity between them, was maybe it constituted flipper foreplay. I knew they come up to the northern waters to feed, but it's possible they go into other frenzies too, besides for feeding. The one thing I've never thought could become a commonplace event in my life, a chance to see whales so often. I'd only seen them once before, gazing from the point high above Cascade Head. I saw what I thought at the time was a humpback. They are pretty distinctive. But out there on the job site, seeing one cruising by wasn't even anything to point out to my co-workers. Got to be no big deal, nothing to write home about. My take on the whale activity was that they were usually good neighbors. For the most part, they just swam by quietly. I will admit they do spout noisily on occasion and sometimes make a booming sound, but you get used to it. I heard it quite often when working in other locations in Alaska too. There on the point, we could hear them slapping their tails with a sound like a cannon firing. As well, they can roll and slap their flippers, getting a similar result. Sometimes it sounds like a ship battle out there among the islands to our west. Again, I think it was just showing off for a prospective mate, being the expert in whales that I am. Unfortunately, I never got to see any feeding behavior, giant jaws erupting from the sea to engulf clusters of herrings and such. And also, I never heard them singing. So apart from those two things, for sure, you can count me as an expert. So that was my experience living with whales. Everyone should be so lucky.
Yeah.
This is a story that takes us back to those of us from Eugene, to the time of the Eugene celebration, when they used to have the Mayor's Art Show. I don't know if you remember the Mayor's Art Show.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I had, it'll explain itself here. This is called A Night at the Mayor's Art Show. It was unusual for us to be drinking at the electric station. Normally we gathered at Joe Federico's Cellar Bar, but that night we were going to the Mayor's Art Show at the Holt Center, and the electric station was closer. We were all kind of arty. Robert painted in oils and pastels mostly, but he'd spend hours down at Joe's doing table art with crayons or colored pencils too, while listening to the live nightly jazz. Little David was also a painter as well as being a poet. He'd started a street newspaper called the Street Poet Society, which included local artists. I think he published a few of my poems in it. He kept it going for about a year before it got to be taking up too much of his time. Steve was the literary maven of the group, more than me. He could sit at the bar with his eyes closed and recite obscure poetry he was forced to memorize as a young man. But he was a great patron of the art, had tickets for the Bach Festival every year, and was generally a good resource for esoteric information, depending on how much wine he'd had. So we headed over to the Holt to see the art. It's quite an exciting show for the local artists in the sculpture and painting circles, and to get a spot there was a real feather in your cap. Robert had one there once, I believe, though little David had never been so lucky. He'd tried more than once. Usually, if you get rejected, you take your art to a gallery named the Salon de Refusés that displays what didn't make it to the mayor's art show. Sometimes I like the rejected work better than what got the place in the spotlight. One item that caught Robert's attention after we'd been through most of the gallery was a mock-up of the current president, the elder Bush, set up like his picture was a target for the actual knives sticking in the board of the base. The picture already had puncture wounds here and there for effect. It was definitely a political statement, and Robert agreed with it. He was often vocal about his dislike for George Herbert Walker, so it was short work of him to pry out a knife and stab the picture of the president right then and there. When he'd completed his brazen act, to the shock of many art lovers around him, he looked around to support from the rest of us, perhaps wanting a pat on the back for such bravery, but we were nowhere to be found. We had the sense to know not to be in the company of such blatant sedition. I don't think he ever got over it about how we abandoned him that night, but later events shows the wisdom of our action, else we'd maybe have been tarred with the same brush as our comrade. Because a couple of weeks after the event, rumors circulated that a couple of government agents were in town asking questions about the incident. Apparently Robert's vandalism had been reported somewhere up the line, although it wasn't clear they had figured out who he was yet. The fact that the rumors might be true led Robert to start feeling a bit paranoid. He was known around town as an artist and could have been recognized except for one thing. He'd always signed his artwork Robert August, and his real last name, not August, was only to be known by the people writing checks for buying it. I think that was the end of Robert submitting any more entries to the mayor's art show. The evening threw a scare into him, probably triggering off some PTSD he had from when he'd been a teenager and done some equal rights marching or something down in Texas, which the locals hadn't taken kindly to. He was never clear what had happened to him, but it must have left a scar, because he was afraid stabbing the president in effigy would bring that same kind of unpleasant scrutiny from government bullies. Eugene is a poorer place now that there's no more Eugene celebration, so no more mayor's art show either. Back then it was a yearly event. The downtown came alive, music at several locations, food booths, crafty stuff, now all of it a memory. And of the four of us who attended that particular art show, I'm the only one who is still alive to tell the tale. So I guess the city's poorer because of that too. You can't help but miss the arty type when they're gone, even if they might have had an unpopular political leaning that caused them to act out now and again.
Yeah. I do miss the celebration.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But when you take a look at all those new buildings downtown, remember there was a lot of vacant lots back then, and that's where the bands and everything was, and now there aren't. So now is my otter story. Just like my whale story, I have an otter story. Everybody knows how playful otters are. The little ones look like they'd make fun little pets. All they need is a mudslide and a creek to wash off in, and they're happy. I don't want anyone to think they should try and go out and get an otter for a pet. They are at bottom a weasel. It might get in the way if one were to try that. A friend of mine told me one time she believed my totem animal to be the otter when she saw me swimming, and from then on I've thought about the little critters differently, almost like their family or something. The first time I saw otters was over in Bend at the High Desert Museum. They had a couple of them that couldn't live in the wild anymore, but still acted like the playful animals they are and were fun to watch. At the time, I didn't feel any connection beyond enjoyment at watching animals play. That would change the more I learned about the history of otters. Otters possess one drawback. They have good fur and make nice leather goods, so they were hunted or trapped from the moment humans discovered that quality. Sea otters were almost trapped to extinction because their fur is about the softest and most luxurious among all of the fur-bearing animals. Wars were fought up in Alaska to control the trade of sea otter furs between natives, Russians, and the English. They weren't much more than skirmishes, but one can tell from how important the dwindling numbers had become to whoever controlled their prime habitat of islands. Laws prohibiting the taking of otters stopped the trade just short of extinction. And after that, the only people who could hunt the animals were the indigenous tribes native to the area who were allowed to use it in their crafts. And now their numbers were rebounded, so it's quite common to see them in the waters of British Columbia and Alaska. And that was where I saw them when I was fortunate enough to travel many times to Alaska to work. I helped to build wooden bridges and boardwalks as well as cabins on remote islands. At Annan Creek, located between Ketchikan and Wrangell, I got to see river otters very often. I wish I could include a photo of them I took, hauled out on a rock eating crab. River otters are much larger than the otters I saw in Bend, but with the same sleek appearance. These otters braved the ocean water and had to be big enough to deal with the wilder elements, including ocean predators. In the picture I took, one of the otters has a clear, sizable abrasion from a close scrape of some kind on its side, attesting to the fact that their life isn't all fun and games. A few years later, I was lucky enough to help build a cabin for the Forest Service on San Fernando Island, an island about 8 miles west from Prince of Wales Island. The cabin we were building was on a point of land at the southernmost tip of the island, a place called Amargura Point. Every day we saw a number of humpback whales cruise around the point, pass by our island going north, and we had a few sea otters that inhabited the area that we saw regularly. The history of that region is interesting. The island we were working on was named by a Spanish explorer who named a series of islands on his way ultimately to Sitka Sound. It turns out that a group of sailors were left at Amargura Point to plot out the sizes and shapes of the nearby islands, trying to map it out for future expeditions to explore the region further. A storm or a series of them stranded them there for a month, the story goes, before they could be picked up. So where we were building the cabin was historical in a sense. As I said before, San Fernando was 8 miles across the water from Prince of Wales Island, which was named by Captain Cook on his way up the Inland Passage, naming places. The Spaniards stuck to the open ocean to the west of what we now call Southeast Alaska on their way north, and so missed quite a number of islands further inland. Our cabin was right on the border between the two expeditions. But back to the otters. Like I said, we kind of got to know our neighborhood otters. There were 3 of them that stuck together that we'd see often. Like the whales, they'd normally come around the point and head north. There didn't seem to be anything to feed on, so we didn't get to see any of that behavior, but just seeing them was good enough. We were nearly done with the cabin when, to me anyway, a sad thing happened. Our 2 dogs raised a ruckus down on the beach at the back of the point, and it turned out a skiff had landed there. And it was a man and 2 women. He was married to one of them, and the other was from further north. The 2 women were natives, and he had a boat. So they went otter hunting. It was all legal and above board, and they had bagged 4 sea otters, thinking they could skin them out on our beach and not knowing of our presence there. I went down to their boat to see the otters, taking my camera. The younger native woman from up north was still on the boat and showed me their catch. She told me how easy they had been to kill. They were so curious they'd come right up to the boat. I bent down and felt their fur and marveled at how soft and thick it was. I read that it's got 1,000 hair follicles per square inch. That doesn't tell you anything about how it feels to stroke it. Ultimately, I just felt too sad to take a picture. I didn't want to have a reminder of that moment and feel it was the right decision to take no photographs of the sad sight. So that's my story about otters, my totem animal. I have a token to my totem that a friend who knows me gave me, a small rock carved in the shape of an otter with a native depiction engraved on it, as an otter would appear on one of their totem poles. I see that little rock every morning and reminds me of my wild family out there, and I wish them well, because I know life isn't all fun and games for anybody, but it's especially true for animals living in the wilderness, I'd have to think. So.